Hey, everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. I'm Dad, this is my den, and today we're going to be talking about a television show from the 1958-59 season called Steve Canyon. I just finished watching it on Tubi and thought it was worth a little review. So the TV show ran, like I said, just one season, 1958 to 59. It managed to compile 34 episodes, which is pretty good. It was on Saturday nights at 9 p.m. originally on NBC, opposite Lawrence Welk and The Gale Storm Show. So really kind of unique in its time slot for what it was offering up. And then in the wintertime, it moved to Thursday nights at 8 p.m. There it was opposite of Zorro, which I got to be honest, as a kid, if I'd been alive then, man, I might have gone Zorro. And it was also on December Bride was also up against it. Contemporary with shows like Peter Gunn, Dragnet, Jack Benny, You Bet Your Life, Bat Masterson. Gives you an idea of what was on at the time period. We're at this point about a decade away from Star Trek, for example. So the show is based upon the comic strip done by Milton Caniff. Steve Canyon was a comic strip, appeared in newspapers, started in 1947, ran till 1988. And I can remember reading this comic strip every once in a while, although strips like that were sometimes hard to get into. Whereas like Peanuts or Far Side or whatever, they're kind of one-shots. You can pick it up and read any of them. These shows were... or these comic strips were continuations. And so, if you didn't start reading it years earlier, you might not know what's going on. But the comic strip involved Steve Canyon, who was, I believe, like ex-Army Air Force. He had his own civilian transport company. He's a pilot. And Korean War, he re-enlists. And from that point on, the series has him in the Air Force. Now, the show does not follow the strip particularly closely. Most of the side characters from the comic strip, from what I could tell, are not in the TV show. It has its own side characters. The TV show, which Milton Caniff was involved with on some level, it was kind of surprising to me. It's not the greatest TV show in the world. I'd probably give it a C plus, but it sort of has a special place in the culture, in the national psychology of the time that makes it maybe worth watching. I was expecting, and I'll say I watched it on Tubi. It's up on Tubi right now. That's where I watched all of it. It kind of pops up as I'm flipping through different things. I think, what the heck? I'm assuming it's going to be sort of square-jawed action adventure, Steve Canyon, it's Cold War, so he's probably, beating up the Ruskies and that kind of stuff. And it really wasn't that at all. The show sort of has two different phases. In the early episodes, it's kind of like an Air Force procedural with a little bit of drama thrown in. And so what I'm saying is, like, the way Dragnet was done in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department. It was trying to show how they did things and things they're going up against and their problems. This was kind of the same for the Air Force. It was showing technologies that they're working on and some of the challenges the Air Force has. Because remember, at this point, we're in the Cold War, but we're not in a hot war, really. And, so it wasn't like a war show. It was sort of, what is the Air Force doing right now? And you get that for, 7 or 8 episodes or so. And then it kind of shifts a little bit. Initially, Steve Canyon is kind of like a test pilot. So the episode would open up telling about where, his current mission, like what his current assignment. Then he becomes the commander of an Air Force base, Big Thunder Air Base in California. At that point, it becomes a little bit more of an adventure drama. You do get you do get some fist fights here and there. You don't get a ton of them. It's not like sort of exactly the bad guy of the week. it's a much more interesting show than I thought it was going to be. And so again, I say C plus, but I almost want to say B minus on it. It was surprising to me. I think it's worth watching. Now the show stars as Steve Canyon, Dean Fredericks. He doesn't have a massive resume. I think, Gen X kids might recognize him from the Mystery Science Theater episode doing The Phantom Planet. He actually retired from acting in 1965. So that would have been, 7 years after he made this? That was about 6 years after Phantom Planet. I don't know, maybe he didn't feel the career was going anywhere. Dean Fredericks passed away, sadly, in 1999 of cancer. I think he was a pretty good actor, and he did the action adventure type hero pretty well. He had that look. In fact, I've always thought, ever since I saw that Phantom Planet, if they were ever going to do a live action Johnny Quest, this guy he's Race Bannon. He's got the hair, the light hair. He's got the look for it. Could have totally played Race Bannon. I wish something like that had ever happened. So favorite episodes of this show. I'm going to go through. These are sort of in order. Don't worry too much about that. And I'm going to do my best not to spoil them for you. Among the early episodes, Operation B-52 was pretty cool. It's about Canyon and a crew on a B-52 Stratofortress. Or is it Superfortress or Stratofortress? We'll just call it a B-52. They're trying to break the around the world speed record. And there's some problems at one point, and they have to make some tough decisions and figure out how to get through something that's a seemingly minor error that really threatens their lives. Maybe the most interesting of the early ones was Operation Mushroom, and it's almost just a documentary that is narrated by Fredericks about the testing of the H-bomb. And it goes into all the preparations and how the actual test goes and what they have to do with the aircraft after the test. So if you're interested in history, you're interested in that period, that's a really good one to watch. But again, it's really not dramatic in the least. It's mostly just voiceover. In the more dramatic episodes, there's an episode called The Prisoner, where Steve he ends up in New Guinea and discovers something that suggests there's an American POW that was lost during World War II over New Guinea who might still be alive. And he goes in search of him. And this involves the kind of classic trope now of Japanese soldiers who do not know the war is over. But interesting handling of the Japanese soldiers and their commander. I rather liked that. There's Operation Souvenir, which again, it starts in Taipei, so what we would now call Taiwan, involves a heroin smuggling ring that is taking these little sculptures, they look like they're maybe made out of coconuts, hiding heroin in them, and then giving them to American servicemen who take them back overseas. And then these guys, the part of their ring is on these air bases. They sneak into their quarters, remove the heroin, and go their happy way. So that was kind of an interesting one. I didn't expect that. Operation Diplomat. In that one, Steve is supposed to be taking a American diplomat, I think, to Pakistan, and they want to go the fastest possible route, which he says is dangerous because it gets real close to enemy territory. And in fact, enemy aircraft end up harassing them, driving them into enemy territory where they have to land, and they got to figure out how to get out. Again, kind of a surprising ending, and I really enjoyed it. And you get these Cossacks and stuff. It's pretty cool. Operation Intercept. So it starts with these kids who are doing some target shooting, obviously near the airbase. A stray bullet somehow nicks the cockpit window of a jet bomber. And unbeknownst to the pilot, he takes off. Because of that, he freezes to death in midair. And the bomber is on course for the Soviet Union. So it's a little like the old show, old movie and book, Failsafe, which, by the way, high recommendation. Great book, good movie adaptation. But they've got to figure out, how do we stop this bomber before it starts a war? Or, to some extent, even just gets into the Soviet Union where they can capture it and study it. Blackmail was a really interesting episode. It involves war brides from Czechoslovakia who have families still behind the Iron Curtain, and they're being blackmailed by a ring who is saying, hey, like, if you don't give us money, we're going to give some of that money to help support your relatives who have been arrested, and they're going to starve to death if you don't, or blah blah blah, or the government over there is going to lean on them. Interesting topic, and I don't know if that was a real major problem, although I can imagine it might have been. But that was a good episode, kind of a different feel. Similar feel was one called Iron Curtain. Now, it was a follow-up to an earlier Christmas episode they did. Now, this one actually has a face in it that Star Trek fans will know, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's set in Vienna. It involves some spies who kidnap a girl in order to get a hold of somebody in the underground. And it has a pretty interesting surprise ending. Yeah, that one was another one I really liked. I think my favorite episode was called The Trap. And in The Trap, Jerry Paris, who plays the second in command of the airbase, and you'll probably know Jerry Paris from he played Dr. Helper on the Dick Van Dyke Show, so the neighbors of the Petries, and he also did a lot of directing on Happy Days. That seems to be what he primarily did, kind of post Dick Van Dyke. So this series is before the Dick Van Dyke Show. He plays Major Williston, and in this episode, Williston is testing a new landing method, and his airplane ends up kind of crashing after it lands. It flips over, so he's in this flipped over airplane, and they got to figure out how to get him out of this thing. And their worry is he's going to lose his legs. He can't really feel his legs. There's bleeding. They're not sure where it's coming from. It's almost like an episode of Emergency, if you know that show from the 70s. I really liked it. And it was kind of tense. You wondered what was going to happen to the character, if it was going to be okay in the end. So there's some good episodes. So why watch Steve Canyon? I'm saying, man, maybe it's like a C+ kind of show. What do you watch this thing for? Well, I can think of 3 reasons. And then they're not going to necessarily hit the whole general public, but if you're watching my channel, maybe these will register with you. Number 1, we're talking late 50s. We're talking the jet age. We're talking not quite the dawn of jet fighters, but early jet fighters, and you get to see a lot of it. You got the F-102 Delta Dagger. You got the F-104 Starfighter in an episode. The F-100 Super Sabre shows up a few times. You got the B-52 we mentioned, C-130 Hercules, the Atlas missile. So if you love the tech of that period, and you get to see a lot of it, especially in the earlier episodes where they're talking about some interesting ideas, like towing 3 fighters behind a tanker, so that if there's like a missile alert or an invasion, you'll have fully fueled fighters right there ready to go. Because in the Cold War, getting there first with the most, well, I mean, that's just a rule of war, but it was a big deal. How do we intercept quickly? Another one involved very similar idea was launching a fighter, an F-100 Super Sabre, almost vertically. So it would have rockets that would launch it, so you didn't need to have a runway. So that was pretty cool. In fact, I remember seeing him do that in an episode of Thunderbirds. Jerry Anderson Thunderbirds had some aircraft doing that. So I was like going, wait, are you serious? They actually tried this? And they got it on film. They got it on film of them trying to do this. So you get to see some really cool tech. So if you're like that hard sci-fi or just engineering guy, jet age, pretty cool stuff. You also get a sense of the drama of the period, of how things were written. A lot of the episodes, they have a similar feel to Star Trek, which is a decade later, but it was still the same kind of mindset. The people who wrote these things, who, like I say, had that kind of maybe a little bit of an engineering mindset. It's the Cold War mindset. It's of a time, and it's a good representation of the writing of that time. So yeah, I found it worthwhile at that. But maybe the best reason to watch Steve Canyon, and this is especially true, or maybe primarily true, if you are a classic TV fan, is the guest stars. And really using the term stars is probably even wrong, because most of these people, they were kind of new. They were young. And you recognize a lot of faces who are going to go on to be maybe bigger later on. In the first episode, you get kind of a rare on-screen appearance of Paul Frees. Now, Paul Frees mostly did voiceover work. And in fact, he does voiceover work on Steve Canyon. But he shows up live. And I mean, if you've watched any TV from the 50s, 60s, probably into the 70s, you have heard Paul Frees' voice. If you've gone to Disneyland, you've heard Paul Frees' voice. It's still played to this day. So it's kind of cool to see him actually on screen. He was playing a British pilot. It was kind of cheesy, but that was kind of cool. Speaking of Star Trek, you get quite a few Star Trek alumni. First episode, you get Morgan Woodward, Captain Tracy of the ill-fated, I think, Exeter, if I'm getting that right. You get Teague Andrews, who's better known for being on the Mod Squad, but he did play a Klingon in an episode of Star Trek. You get Celia Lovsky, T'Pau. T'Pau is in 2 episodes. The one I mentioned that occurs in Vienna, and the Christmas episode that kind of preceded it. So you get her in 2 episodes. It's kind of cool. You also get a very young Leonard Nimoy in a very small role, and DeForest Kelley shows up. So you got quite a few Star Trek alumni. But beyond that, and I'm just going to start rattling off some names here. You got Marion Ross, best known from Happy Days. Russell Johnson, the professor from Gilligan's Island. John Hoyt, who's in like a million things. Sue Randall, who played the Beaver's teacher on Leave It to Beaver. Richard Anderson, $6 Million Man. Nick Adams, Invasion of the Astro Monster. William Shallert, who was in a million things. Barney Phillips, who was in kind of a cool episode of The Twilight Zone. The one that's set in the diner where there's aliens involved. Parley Bear, who was in Andy Griffith's Show and a million other things. Hayden Rourke, Colonel Bellows from I Dream of Jeannie. You get Lenny Weinrib, who was in a million different things. Gavin MacLeod from Mary Tyler Moore Show, Love Boat, is in one. Oh, it's a bad guy, too. Maybe like shades of his character on Hawaii Five-0. Big Chicken. You get Jack Weston, Warner Klemperer of Hogan's Heroes, Henry Corden, John Anderson, who, if you don't know the name, you know the face, especially if you watch Westerns in the 50s and 60s. Dabbs Greer. You got Claude Akins, Sheriff Lobo. Ron Ely, who played Tarzan, actually plays opposite Sheriff Lobo. You got Hal Smith, Otis from Andy Griffith's Show, also did voices in Space Angel, one of my favorite old sci-fi cartoons. James Drury of The Virginian. This one blew me away. I actually read it today, and I'm like going, wait a minute. She was what? She was in this? Mary Tyler Moore. Non-speaking role. Didn't even notice it was her. She actually has a little scene with Jerry Paris, who also was on the Dick Van Dyke Show. So Mary Tyler Moore had to be one of her earliest roles on television ever. You got Julie Adams from The Creature of the Black Lagoon, who's in a kind of cool episode about UFOs. Ross Martin from Wild Wild West. Amanda Blake from Gunsmoke. Dana Elcar from MacGyver, James Hong, who was in everything back in the day, Martin Milner of Adam 12, and maybe kind of the coolest, Mike Road. And you're going, who's Mike Road? Mike Road's the voice of Ray Spannon on Johnny Quest. So I was like, whoa, there's the guy I think should play Ray Spannon talking to Ray Spannon's voice. So a ton of guest stars. It's very of its time. 34 episodes. It's on the Tubi channel now. You can watch it for free. Maybe check out one of the episodes I mentioned. Maybe watch the whole thing through. But Steve Canyon, very cool Cold War era TV show about the Air Force. Like I said, I give it it's a C plus maybe in terms of the overall quality of the show, but it's maybe like a B plus in terms of being a show of its time and kind of worth giving a try. So hopefully you'll go out and give it a shot. I think that's going to do it today for Dad's Den of Pop Culture. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button. If you have enjoyed what I've been doing, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. That really helps the channel. I'd love to hear your comments there. Do you have any memories of this show or the comic strip? Maybe you're an Air Force veteran from back in the day. Heck, maybe it'd be kind of cool if an Air Force veteran watched it and could point out all the mistakes that they made. That'd be great too. Any comments, I'd love to hear them. But until next time on Dad's Den, have a great day. Be kind to people out there, and I will see you around. Bye-bye.